group called Good Reads, and we meet once a month. And we've been trying lately to have some Alaskans authors that we can talk to because it's quite easy now with Zoom. We don't have to worry about transportation and so on. So today we're very happy that Heather Lende from Haines has agreed to join us and have a conversation with us. Our plan, we are kind of loose here and informal. Our plan is to allow people to ask questions as you wish. We will ask, though, that you mute yourself when you're not asking a question so that we don't have a background of dogs barking and phones ringing and that sort of thing. So we'll let Heather begin telling us something about herself and how she got into the writing business. And then we'll welcome questions from you. Heather?
Well, thank you very much for asking me. And I would also say, you don't have to limit the people you ask to Alaskan authors either, although there's plenty of great ones. Because it's the Zoom world, I think you could call anybody you wanted. And I don't know why they wouldn't want to talk with a group of readers. So thank you very much for asking me. And it's really my privilege to be able to be there. I think in terms of, for those of you that don't know who I am, I live in Haines, and I've lived down here since about 1984. 5 children, and I have, they're all adult children now. 4 of my daughters all live in Alaska and Haines or Juneau, and my son is in Australia. And I have 11 grandchildren. The youngest 2 are well, the youngest one will be 1 on March 16th, and the oldest just turned 11. I'm married to Chip Lende, and we own a lumberyard and a hardware store in Haines. So that's kind of me. But the writing me is, I started writing mainly for the local radio station here in Haines way back in the 1980s, and did little radio pieces that went out. Some of you may have heard them over the Alaska Public Radio Network, and then they went further afield to the old Christian Science Monitor radio, and then also to NPR. And in the meantime, I ended up actually working for the newspaper, writing the duly noted column in the Chilkat Valley News. And those of you who are familiar with my first book, If You Lived Here, I Know Your Name, the duly noted columns are in between each chapter. And they're real duly noted columns from the paper. It's sort of the social column, and the names are in boldface, but it's not social as in fancy. It's more like, the Smiths went to Disneyland, and while they were there, they saw Aunt Kay and Uncle Roger, and they ran into 4 old friends from Skagway, and you list their names, that kind of thing. Or the preschool's having a bake sale, and you can pre-order, or just sort of things that are, as the founder, Doris Ward, noted, are things worth noting that are part of our history, but they don't deserve a whole lot more than a sentence or 2. And so I started doing that, and that led to writing obituaries for the Chilkat Valley News, so which I still do. I've been writing the obituaries for the paper since 1996. And then in the meantime, I wrote columns for the Anchorage Daily News and Women's Day magazine, all kind of very serendipitously, but I can answer questions about that later. And the same with my books being published. My first book was published because an editor in New York heard a little piece I did on NPR about a picnic in the backyard. It wasn't monumental, and it didn't make you cry and laugh or whatever and smack your head. It was just a little slice of life story, and asked me if I wanted to write a book. And I said, of course. and then I talked to her about this weird thing I do, writing obituaries, and then that became If You Lived Here. And it was my great good fortune that the editor that called me, his name is Amy Gash, and she was with Algonquin Books of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And she's still my editor, and we've worked together through 4 books, all 4 of my books with Amy. And it's just one of the terrific relationships in my life. And she's not only an editor, but probably my greatest teacher. So there's that. And that's pretty much my story. I'm happy to answer any questions or talk about anything you'd like while I'm here.
Well, how about this? Of the books you've written, which one is your favorite?
My favorite is Take Good Care of the Garden and the Dogs, because I think it's the most personal. I wrote about faith in it, which I usually don't. But I think that's my favorite one, although I haven't gone back and read it. I kind of like Of Bears and Ballots too, because just the most recent one, and it was a hard one of the most. It was the most difficult one to write, and so I feel pretty proud of that accomplishment that I survived being on the Haines Borough Assembly. For those of you that don't know, that's what that book is about, the new one, and that I was able to write about it and figure some stuff out. And I kind of went back to the same structure that in some ways that my first book had. And so I like that about it, a longer narrative. You know, I felt more confident as a writer in writing that one, but also more exposed just as a human being. It was pretty honest. And that's always a risk. So I'm gaining some courage, I guess. And I think those are important things.
Yeah, how is it writing about people in your own town by name? How do they think about it? And do you ask permission?
No, I don't ask permission. I think I understand the difference between public and private. So for instance, in, of Bears and Ballots, everything that pretty much is said there, except for conversations maybe with my closest friends, are public. They were recorded in assembly meetings or in other public forums or the newspaper articles or stories. So I felt pretty comfortable there. And in terms of conversations with my friends and family, I think over the years I've developed a kind of I think a radar of what I can say and what I can't say. And usually, even when people read my books, they'll say, gee, that was so personal about your daughter or about a friend or whatever. And by the time I've written about it, it's not anymore, and it's been resolved. And so it's usually a year or 2 out. And then even with the publication, it might even be 3 years since that time. And so, but what I try to do, and I think I do it okay, is to bring the immediacy of those feelings right back in, so that you can feel it going along with me. So there's that. But it's also, I write about where I live, and the people who live here are certainly part of it. And I don't know why that would be off limits.
Yeah.
And I always think too, I think back to a couple things. One is obviously Doris Ward, and that duly noted that, that it's history, that I'm writing about how we live in this one place, obviously from my point of view, which is also something that gave me courage, that I have a right to my perspective. And I carefully, I think, craft sentences and comments to not say them, but this is how they made me feel. That made me feel, not particularly a judgment or a comment on someone else's story, but this is what's filtered through me. And you're allowed to have that point of view. But also, our town, Thornton Wilder, I was in that play in Haines years ago, and I played the stage manager, and which is typically a man's part, but whatever. So I think about that all the time, where he talks about the the uh, time capsule that they put in the corner there when they're burying stuff in Grover's Corner, about so that people, 1,000 years from now will know how we lived in this time in this place when they start opening up the newspaper, or the little things that they put in there, not the big things. I mean, anybody's going to be able to Google whatever happened in Washington in January or whatever, those, the price of oil, all those things. But, here they'll know how we lived in one small town in Alaska. And at this point now I cover pretty much a good part of the 19th and 20th centuries, well, 20th and 21st centuries, because of the obituaries that I wrote even back in If You Lived Here, were for people that were born in 1910, 1920, and our town was incorporated in 1910. And also I've written obituaries for a lot of the native elders and and those connections where they were born and what life was like when they were children, and what they, what their parents spoke at home, or if they were sent to boarding schools, or some of those stories are incorporated throughout my books. So I think it's important, I guess. But I'm mindful, with the last book, my husband did wonder if I was going to get a ticket out of town from somebody, but that hasn't happened.
Yeah, that is the one I was thinking of. What was it, Big Dawn?
Yeah, hasn't happened. Hasn't. So I don't know. I know that he's read the book because, Haines is a small place. So the woman that owns the bookstore said he came in right away and wanted to get a copy to check for Pinocchios. And that was back in June. And I haven't heard, there hasn't been a letter to the editor or a letter to me. So I guess he didn't find as many as he was hoping to. Or if he did, they weren't ones that he minded. They probably aired in his favor.
Okay, what question do we have?
Yes, this is Larry Zervis. I have a question about obituary writing.
Sure.
I thought families and friends did that sort of thing. Is it different in Haines?
Yes, it's different in Haines, but it's changing. In Haines, our newspaper was founded, now, I don't know, 55, 56 years ago, as an extension of, it was actually the school newspaper. The school journalism class and a teacher and then a student decided we needed a local paper as well. And they founded the Chilkat Valley News. And one of the early things they decided to do was obituaries, because they thought that if someone died in Haines, it was news in 1960 or whenever the paper was founded. And so the person got a feature story, kind of a profile. And those have been editorial decisions. They're not mine. And of course, Ray ran the paper for some 30 years, and then Bonnie Hedrick, another publisher, took it over, kept that same format. Tom Morford, when he had the paper, did, and now Kyle Clayton is moving a little bit past that. He does offer a space for paid obituaries for the families to do that if they want, because obviously it's a way for a newspaper to make money. Instead of paying me $75, that's what I get to do the obituary. A family for that size of an obituary, say 700-800 words, might pay $700-800 in the newspaper for one like that. And that's not something people here do. So it's just a tradition in Haines. And I have noticed, though, over the last year with COVID, that because there's no formal services or real the typical community events that follow a local death, that the obituaries haven't been as urgent, and people have died and not asked for one, sort of waiting for when they have a memorial in June or whatever. Where in the past in Haines, because we don't have a funeral parlor, and when someone dies, their body's kept at the fire hall. There's usually, when a death occurs, they want that in the newspaper so that then people will know to come to the service or the potluck afterwards or whatever is happening. And that usually is very quick. It's within 3 or 4 days because of the nature of the situation. That's changed now. People are flying bodies out to get cremated, or going ahead and just burying somebody and then waiting because it's not a public gathering. So we'll see. And also social media has changed it some because people learn all about it on Facebook or different websites via email or text messages or whatever, where it used to be the paper would often be the place that made the announcement.
Thank you.
Would you read a little something from one of your favorite books, or just a passage or something?
Yeah, maybe I'll, how about if I'll read you something from Find the Good, because they're shorter pieces and they, I like to read something that you can read the whole thing. Because I don't like stopping and then trying to explain that. I'll read you one that is indicative of, that in some ways even answers some of these questions that I've been asked, and also points out to how I do write about other people, real people in Haines. And the other thing I'll tell you before I read this one is that the information that is in this, again, I learned publicly, mostly at the memorial service. It was part of the eulogies, and the whole town is invited. And so then in a case like that, where the town is invited to the American Legion for a memorial service, the eulogies, the information that's given over the microphone is public. And also then in writing the obituary, I learned some things as well, but then also these things were printed in the paper in the obituary. So again, I consider them public. The information that is divulged pretty much all is, except for some of the things that are my own observations and how I put it together and my response to it. So you can think about that, I guess, as I'm reading it, since you asked. And this is called Tell Them You'll Miss Them When They're Gone. Clyde Bell said hello to me every time he spotted me walking by, sometimes even coming out of a seafood store and crossing the street. I never said goodbye. It is hard to believe he won't be stepping out on the porch of his shop with the house heather today. And before I can reply, telling me what I should be writing about for that paper. Listen, gal, he'd say, and wonder if I saw the colorful sunset last night, and what was I going to tell people about it? And didn't I know it wasn't natural to have colored contrails or exhaust fumes behind airplanes? Those odd red and purple clouds were produced by military jets, covertly spreading chemtrails laced with heavy metals. Clyde believed the federal government was salting the clouds to alter the jet stream in order to change tundra into wheat-producing prairie, because bread would be the new oil when everything goes to hell down south. Clyde could be found most days smoking a cigarette and nursing a can of Ham's beer at Bell's Seafood, which is in the former town jail adjacent to Bell's store, where his wife Doris sells sundries and flowers. Bell's Seafood has a rusty potbelly wood stove by the door with a stack of firewood on the floor nearby, 2 aging glass front cases, one with frozen fish, one with fresh, and some big chest freezers in the back room. The presentation is not the most beautiful, but the product is good. A lot like Clyde, actually. He was lean, freckled, and had a boyish yet weathered face. If he wasn't at the store, there was a note on the window to see Doris next door if you needed fish. That meant he was at the harbor buying more, or cruising around town with his 3-legged dog in the passenger seat of a pickup, plastered with paper signs advertising his latest special: king crab legs, fresh halibut, or oysters from Prince of Wales Island. When I heard Clyde had been medevaced to the hospital, I figured he'd be back soon. He died a day later in Anchorage, organ failure. He was 60. Dora said she knew Clyde was seriously ill, and so did he, but he didn't want to leave town. You may remember that Haines doesn't have a hospital, and so this is sometimes common. I mean, it's not unusual, put it that way, for people who fear that they might be very ill to not want to leave town in case they don't come back. His brother-in-law, church elder, and former volunteer fire chief, Rock Aaron, said that a few days before, Clyde had confessed he didn't think anyone would miss him. It's true that Clyde had a prickly side, but did he really not know the size of the crater his falling star would make when it finally hit the ground and flamed out? He should have attended his memorial service at the American Legion Hall. There were not enough chairs. More people stood on the sidewalk. One friend reminded us that when Johnny Cash died, the renter in the apartment above Clyde's store blared Cash songs out the window for 24 hours. When Main Street neighbors complained, Clyde marched upstairs, turned the music even louder, and sat on the couch and listened to those songs until tears streamed down his face. Hanging out with Clyde, another friend said, was a lot like listening to a good country song. He was always sad and he was always laughing. Everyone knew that when his oldest son, Matt, drowned in a swimming hole, Clyde was shattered. He'd talk about Matt's spirit visiting him from beyond. After that, he connected with a lot of grieving people. One was Steve Chrishell, who owns a wildlife park. Steve's ex-wife was killed by a caged tiger in the lower 48. Soon, Clyde was providing fish scraps to help feed Steve's Alaskan animals. No one in Clyde's family was prepared for the size of the crowd that filled the Legion. My neighbor, Elizabeth, usually only attends services for close friends. When I asked her why she came, she shrugged. Clyde was Clyde. I'll miss him. She said Clyde gave away more flowers than Doris sold. I'm sure Elizabeth had been on the receiving end. He had a soft spot for elderly widows like her and for parents also like her who had survived the death of a child. Elizabeth wasn't the only surprise mourner. The banker paid Clyde last respects, and so did a group of kids in baggy pants who usually stand around smoking on Main Street. Proper British elder Maisie Jones was there, seated near a tank top, multi-tattooed bartender. There were pressed blouses and fishy sweatshirts. It also smelled of aftershave, tobacco, diesel, sweat, shampoo, patchouli oil, and the food for the reception afterward prepared with help from the ladies of the Port Chilcoot Bible Church. Bar guitarist Lucky Walker took the podium last and said he'd only been in town a few years, but he and Clyde had appreciated music together. He adjusted his bomber jacket, smoothed back his ponytail, set down his own guitar, held up Clyde's, and asked if an old friend of Clyde's would come up and play it. Tony, whose family owns a Pioneer bar, walked up front wearing his best suit with a bow tie, something he said my man Clyde would approve of. Then Tony and Lucky played Clyde's favorite song, Ry Cooder's Mexican Divorce, which was so out of place yet so right for the scene that it was perfectly Clyde. In closing, Lucky and Tony led everyone in Amazing Grace. Well, almost closing, because after that we sang Happy Birthday to Barbie, who waitresses at the grill half of the bar across from Bell's store, cleans a motel, and has 4 young children. Lucky said Clyde would have wanted us to. When the song was over, no one was quite ready to move to the potluck tables and instead stood around waiting for something more to happen. Lucky filled the space with Tears in Heaven. It was the song that was played at Clyde's son's funeral. Who doesn't cry when they hear, Would you know my name if I saw you in heaven? I'd know Clyde's name and he'd know mine, and no doubt everyone else's in that hall. He'd greet us each as if no time had passed at all since he last said, Hey gal, here's something to put in that paper. I don't regret not writing a column about Clyde's suspected chemtrails, but I am terribly sorry he died without knowing how much he would be missed. There aren't a lot of people who stop me on the sidewalk to share thoughts about the great beyond or government conspiracies, trusting that I'll listen. Clyde didn't know how I felt about his company, how much richer he made my life with those unusual, brief, thought-provoking chats, because I never told him, except in a have a nice day, see you soon kind of way. Do the other people I care about, the ones who may not be in my inner circle, but who contribute to my well-being nearly every day not know that either? Do yours? What should we do? Be braver and do as the poets and saints advise. String a few kind words together and say them out loud. It doesn't have to be a symphony or a eulogy. A country song will do. You're gonna make me lonesome when you go is plenty. So that's maybe more than you wanted to hear, but I like doing a whole story. My glasses, you'll have to forgive me. I can't see to read with my glasses on, but I can't see you without them. I'm backwards. And I know you can get this fixed, but I haven't figured it out.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Yeah, oh, go ahead.
Go, Mary. No, go.
Yeah, Heather, I have a question. Let me just say, I think your obituaries are wonderful. And it's interesting in reading obituaries, which we seem to do more of these days. It's like, oh, I'm learning all about this person after they've passed away. And that seems kind of sad, I guess. But
Yeah.
obituaries seem pretty important. But my question is, when you're writing, you have an audience? Because I think when I was reading part of your last book, I was thinking she's writing to people who don't know the essence of Alaska. And some of us that have lived here like 50 or 60 years, whatever, it's like we kind of get Alaska. It feels like, oh, she's telling me things I already kind of know.
Mhm.
I thought, well, maybe you're trying to write for the non-Alaskan, or maybe you can talk about that.
It's a little both, I think. Obviously, I try not to, do like the travelogue Alaska stuff like Alaskans would already know. As you say, I'm sort of hyper aware of that, I guess. So I don't want to be somebody that's taking you out of the story and explaining things. But I think because my editor is in New York and hadn't been here until actually after Find the Good was written, after my third book was written, Amy came to visit. So sometimes I explain things to her, and she'll ask in the context of it, what does this mean? Tell me about that. And so she's one of the, I in my head, I write to specific people in a way, and that's why, I speak to you, whoever's reading it, fairly directly. And Amy certainly is part of that, but also to my mother in a way that were sort of like letters home. And my mother's familiar enough with Alaska, but didn't live here. So would come for 2 weeks a year. So there might be, something that I'd have to explain a little bit, or that they might not get. And so but that's, I do write, I think I tend to write for specific people. And then hopefully when people are reading it, it feels like I'm writing it right to them and not to you all out there in the world, but specific. And I think my impulse to write started with letters home to my mom, and then having an editor that was also in New York where my mother was, that would ask those questions. I answer them in the text, and those are sometimes when you see that. She'll send a note saying, tell me more about this, or I don't get this, and then I'll say it. I think too, I also, I tend to be kind of super aware of the needs of others in some ways. And so I always want to make sure that I include people, that I don't make assumptions that make people feel that they haven't been invited to the party or need to go look things up. I tend to be overly concerned about that to a fault, maybe.
I was just going to comment that in what you read brought up an issue that I've encountered through the years, is when somebody is sick but maybe not dying, how do you either talk to them or write them and say, I don't know whether you're going to die or not, but this is what you've meant to me. That's all I have. It's just a comment. I guess I'll try harder, but it's hard to resolve.
Yeah, I would say not to just take the first sentence off. I don't know whether you're going to die or not, but just write and say, I've been thinking all these years how much you mean to me, and I just thought I'd let you know, and go with that, without saying why you're writing now, but you just felt like it. And those are notes that are kind of a good habit to get into. Postcards, or even, I don't know, even your grandchildren, just in case something happens to you, to send them a note so they know what they meant to you, I think sometimes.
To back up a little bit, there was a chat in the chat room in response to Mary's comment about for whom do you write, and is it Richard or Marlis who wrote that? Anyway, it says Richard Henderson. It's Marlis. Oh, okay, Marlis. Marlis said their elders group at church read your book and found it a great springboard for us to discuss our own death, diversity, etc. Everyone agrees that it was a great book for our group. Thank you. And the book they read was Take Care of the Garden and the Dog.
Yeah.
But then she added, in response to Mary Matthews' question about for whom do you write, she said, our group of elders have all lived here many, many years. We felt that your writing was for us who have lived here. We identified with your writing.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think it's really, writing is so personal. As you all know, I mean, we all have our favorites and favorite books that we like. And there's a lot of books that are really good that I just doesn't do much for me. And then there's ones that people will say they didn't like it very much and I just love it and couldn't get enough of it. And I think that's what I like about picking up a book. It's a pretty private interaction, really. And you can once I write it, I don't get to lean over your shoulder and go, no, this is what I meant. Or, oh, I'm sorry I feel that way. No, let me explain. Like, you just have to hope that you've done it well enough that it'll connect. And sometimes you hit and sometimes you miss, I think.
What are the things that you're reading that are influencing you the most now?
Right now, it's been a really interesting year for me because I've been reading a lot of poetry because I was asked to sort of do the little introductions for this Alaska Quarterly Review literary magazine. They're doing a series every Sunday of the sort of these famous poets and writers who have been in AQR, and I get to introduce them. And I hadn't been as familiar with them as I should be probably, so that each week when I'd read who's coming up, then I'd think, well, I better listen to poetry podcasts and I better read interviews with them. And I've just taken on a new appreciation for poetry. For instance, I like a woman named Naomi Shahid Nye. I've actually even we've become kind of pen pals over reading her poems and essays. I've always liked poets like Mary Oliver, and you could figure, Jane Kenyon, Billy Collins, but then I'm appreciating a lot of the Alaskan poets as well. Peggy Shoemaker. There's poets in Juneau, Emily Wall, and then Lance Twitchell's a Tlingit poet, going back to even rereading some of Nora Dowenauer's poetry. There's Ishmael Hope in Juneau. I just find it's a different way of expressing yourself, and they're short and they kind of hit. Sometimes again they miss, but a lot of times they really hit. And in this COVID time, it's been sometimes hard for me to have a longer attention span on novels, that especially sort of challenging novels. So I've been reading, mysteries and whodunits and adventure stories. I've reread a couple of books. I just finished rereading The Only Kayak by Kim Haycox because I just, I keep hearing people quoting it and going back, and then I'll I got to read this. And I hadn't remembered a lot of it, and it was better for me the second time around. I read Hank Leffner's new book on Richard Nelson not too long ago, and that's another a really good one. I went back and I reread Sherry Simpson's The Way Winter Comes after she died. So I'm kind of all over the place. Right now I'm reading a book that was recommended by a wine and book club in Haines, and it's Auntie Poldy and the Sicilian Lions, and it's a sort of a whodunit about a about a boozy old broad in Sicily, and it was written by a German of Italian descent. So there's a couple different translations, but I'm enjoying that very much. I feel like I've been on vacation in Sicily with a really interesting character.
Thank you. I noticed that you have an old typewriter. Maybe it's a young typewriter next to you. Do you do you actually use that, or do you work on a computer, or how do you write?
I write on a computer. I take lots of little notes. I have little papers all over the place when I'm working on anything. I write by hand with all my notes. I don't take notes on the computer on my phone. And then I type them into the computer as notes. And then I work on pieces from those notes. But I do like typewriters. This is a 1962 Olivetti Laterra 32. And it's a cool typewriter. And I take notes for the day kind of on it, little things like my to-do list I put on it. I like to write letters on it, notes to my grandkids on it, poems, I write haikus, and a lot of bears and ballads. During that time of writing that book, I was a little scared of putting things in my computer that I might send out to a friend to say, look what I just wrote about the meeting last night, and maybe I shouldn't, because I have this tendency to think everybody's interested in what I have to say. And I knew that some of those things were difficult and political. And so I kept notes on the typewriter, and then I put them in 3-ring binders. And then I could go back afterwards. And when I wrote that book, I would have to transcribe some of it in. But I knew then that it wouldn't be so easy to send this. I'd have to actually transcribe it onto the computer if I was going to send what I was thinking after the meeting or the notes before the meeting. I took them on this. And then since then, I've actually had some fun, and I have 5 manual typewriters now. And I just think they're cool. I like to play with them. I think they make writing fun. And I put them on the dining room table when my grandchildren, when they can come back over, and I can keep them occupied for a long time with the typewriters and paper, and they just think it's fun too. So it's a good activity.
Yeah, I know that there are a lot of writers who use old manual typewriters or old electric typewriters. I think they would claim that it slows down the process. I think they found that sometimes working at a computer, they can, I don't know, they work too fast. They have a number of explanations for why they kind of want to feel that tactile sensation of typing and all of that. It's kind of interesting. I did notice that you've tended to publish works about every 5 years, almost to the day. Can you? Is that a coincidence, or is there?
It's a coincidence. I have no idea. My kids say that to me. They're like, "Mom, how come it takes you 5 years to write a book that people can read in a weekend?" And I'm like, I don't know. And it seems to be a coincidence of timing. And I noticed, 2005, 2010, 2015, 2020. Basically, I write a book. What happens, my process is I talk to Amy, as I told you, my editor, and she says, "Heather, what are we going to write about?" And then I throw her some ideas, and she's like, "Okay, write a book proposal." I write a proposal. I say what the book's going to be about, and then I go, and pretty much my deadlines are self-imposed. She'll say, "Well, do you think you can get me, 12 chapters, 12 essays by such and such a date?" And that'll give us sort of the bulk of it, and we'll just see where we are. And I say, sure. And then I start writing and send her a big pile, 6 or 7, 8 months later from when I first got the contract, the initial discussion of it. And then she'll look at all that and say, need some more work. You might want to try this and that. And then I go again and I spend another maybe a year writing and another deadline. And then I send her a newer version of what we've done based on her notes. And then we might spend a year going back and forth, editing, discussing, putting things together as a book after that. And then what happens? So then by the third year, boom, it's done. And then when it's done, it's been my experience, and it could be different for other writers. There's then about a year of, you got to do the copy editor and the fact checker and the different design things, and stuff comes back and forth. And I use friends in Haines. I have 3 good friends that also go over all the copy edited manuscript, fact check it for me. We go back and forth that way. And then the book, my publisher goes into sort of a pre-publication. So they do advanced reader copies. So they're out kind of almost a year before the book is out in these paperbacks that go out. And then the book comes out in hardcover. And then that's the year that it's published. So there's some time from when it's done. It's almost 18 months till publication. So they don't really take me 5 years. I think it's closer to 3, but that's the timing with it. And I appreciate that. I appreciate the thoroughness of my publisher for helping to get it right and planning on how it all works. So it's fine with me. I suppose if I don't really work full time, I mean, I work maybe part-time at writing. If I did it 8 hours a day, 5 days, 6 days a week, I could probably put out more. But I've got a lot of other typically family community stuff that I like to do. So I try to write, I try to be at my desk about 4 hours a day when I'm not working. When I'm working, all bets are off. When I'm in a book project, especially the last 4 or 5 months, it's kind of almost all the time, late at night, early in the morning, get up, just go, coffee cups everywhere. My house is a mess. When I finish a book, I typically, it's not that messy. I'm kind of tidy, but it's a mess by my standards. But then I, paint the house, clean my office, get rid of all the boxes because every day when I'm writing too, I print out everything just in case it disappears in the computer. So there's just piles of paper all over the floor, then all need to be recycled and sent out. But I'm afraid to get rid of any of them until it's like done. And then even I wait a month or 2 just in case some gets lost somewhere else. So I'm sort of superstitious about that kind of stuff. And as to the speed of writing on the typewriter, I type with 2 fingers. So I type slow and I read it as I go. I can't type, I don't type 40, 30 words a minute or whatever, just thoughts. I'm typing 1 word at a time, even on the computer.
Yeah, you anticipated my question about how much time you actually spend writing. Did you say that you had 5 kids or have 5 kids?
I did,
And-
yeah. Well,
and-
they're adults now.
Yeah, and when you were raising them, were you writing? Did you have to set aside certain hours in the day when they weren't around? How did you schedule your time to write with them around?
I think like a lot of moms, the minute they went to school, I was able to work, but then, I'd volunteer at school and do stuff. So the school hours, say 10 to 3. But I also, a big part of my day remains exercise. So I use that time to work out. When the kids were younger, I ran, marathons and cycled a lot. I still work out every morning. So I don't write first thing, I work out first thing, and then I do. And I go for a walk with a friend in the day as well. So that's another hour and a half sort of outing. And I time my writing around that. But like when I'm on a deadline, all of my lovely writing with my tea and my perfect schedule goes right out the window. And whether that's a deadline for a book or a column or an obituary, I just work till I get it done. Typically, and I just get to my desk when I can. And that right now it's been a little different because my dad is here, and he's been here for a while. So, and he's 87, and so He's downstairs, but so he's here. So there's a different schedule there involving, you know, what we do all day, and not always being right here at my desk.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts?
What's next on your schedule?
Today, what's next immediately is tonight from 7 to 8:30, I kind of facilitate a writers group at the Haines Library. So we've been doing that Monday nights since the fall, just to help us get through the winter pandemic time. And that's been really fun. Also, tomorrow, Wednesday mornings, I've been taking my own writing class with Pam Houston through Orion Magazine. And that has been good. I'm behind on those assignments. I haven't blogged in 8 days, which is too long. So I've got to get that going. And today, as I said, I finished a big obituary today, and there'll probably be some questions about it tomorrow, but I've been working on that. I worked on that today for 4 or 5 hours, and I worked on it last week and a little bit on Saturday. And then there's 2 other people that have died recently. So those are coming up. And another person that I've missed that I'll need to work on. So yeah, and in terms of a new book, I don't know where I am yet. I do have a novel that I wrote as part of my MFA program for when I went to the University of Alaska in Anchorage in 2008 to 2011. And there's a publisher at least is reading it right now, and I'm assuming I'd have to fix it up. I know that I'm not sure it's good enough to be published yet, but it would be fun to work on it. So, but I'm pretty sure there'll be another book. I just don't know at the moment what it's going to be.
Is anyone else in your family a writer?
Well, yes, my first cousin is actually a really good writer who's more critically acclaimed than I am, and his name is Stuart Onan. Don't know if you've heard of him, but he's really wonderful. Some of his books include The Last Night at the Red Lobster, story about the last night at a Red Lobster chain restaurant in Connecticut. He wrote a book called The Circus Fire, nonfiction about a famous fire at a circus in Hartford, Connecticut. Huge fire that prior to 9/11 was the largest mass casualty event in the United States. And he's written a couple of my favorite novels that you would like for elders. He wrote this one called Emily Alone. And then the other one is her husband. I think it's called George Himself. But Emily Alone was the first book, and then there's another book about her there's a sequel to this, and it's about an elderly couple in Pittsburgh, and it's really, I just loved Emily Alone, and I think it's called Henry Himself. Her husband was named Henry, and so the sequel is called Henry Himself, and Stuart wrote those, and I just really, really like him. As to give you an idea, the New York Times says Onan is on a one-of-a-kind mission to restore a simple, true sense of humanity to the novel. The Washington Post says, scene after scene, these spare descriptions will make you catch your breath. The world Onan captures thwarts our expectations for cathartic tragedy or gleeful celebration. So anyway, I like those books. So that's one person that's a writer in my family. And one of my granddaughters is, she's just starting a book blog, and she's 11. So that's kind of fun for her school. She's a big reader. And my daughter, Sarah, actually now writes the duly noted column for the Chilkat Valley News. So I guess she's become a writer now too.
Is
You mentioned that you had some recent deaths in your community, I'm assuming that you needed to write obituaries for. Has the virus been affecting your community as it has so many places around the world?
No, and that's interesting. I haven't written a COVID obituary, and we haven't had a COVID death, except tangentially. A former school principal who left here maybe 15, 20 years ago died of COVID, and a young man who had gone to Haines High School and left and was now in his 60s died of it, I believe. But that's, I can't, that wasn't confirmed, but it sounded sort of like that on Facebook. Haines has been remarkably fortunate in that we've had, I think, a total of, on paper, 16 cases. And all but 2 were asymptomatic. And the 2 where there were symptoms, one was a young woman who was, she was in her 20s, and she said she felt pretty sick for a couple of weeks, but like a bad flu. And the other person had more of a mild type flu. And the other thing that's happened here that is even more remarkable is that our clinic is owned by the Southeast Alaska Regional Health Consortium, SEARCH, and they get their vaccines through the Indian Health Service. And they chose to use the vaccines that they were allotted in Southeast Alaska, because they have clinics from Ketchikan all the way up into Skagway. Actually, they care for communities. And anyway, what happened is that the local clinic decided that they were going to use all their vaccines in communities that didn't have hospitals and that would have a difficult time getting to a hospital. And so as of Thursday, I believe there'll be about 1,300 or 1,400 of us vaccinated out of a population of 2,500. Pretty much anybody over 18 who wanted to be vaccinated in Haines has had 1 shot. Many people have had 2 already. I get my second one on Thursday. My daughters that are 30 and 35 and their husbands will also be getting their second shots on Thursday. All the school teachers, anybody over 18 who wanted one has been offered one. And
that sounds great. And when you write your obituaries, do you include the cause of death when you know the cause?
Always. And even if we don't know the cause, the editorial guidance from the Chilkat Valley News is that there has to be a cause of death. And also natural causes don't count. And that's a rule from original editors and previous editors who have, excuse the gallows humor, but they'll say, a heart attack is natural, and so is falling off a cliff, but they're very different deaths. And so he insisted on a cause of death. The only times we've gotten in a little trouble is with someone who is 99 or 100 years old, and their family says, they died of old age. And there's been some arguments about what exactly is the warranty on the human body. I mean, how do you know it's old age? It had to be something. But if they were just peaceful at home and they weren't being treated for any illness, we had to.
Sounds like my
let it
mother
go.
at 96. And when I asked the doctor what was her cause of death, he said her body just simply gave her organs
Wore
just
out.
simply gave up. And so I said, well, what did you put on the death certificate? And he said, pneumonia. I said, oh, I didn't know she had pneumonia. He said, no, she didn't. But when an elderly person dies and we don't have a reason, we put down pneumonia on the death certificate. So I learned something.
So I have to say something here. Yeah. So I don't know, but that's
Thank you.
that's how it works here.
Thank you.
How do you handle suicide, writing about suicide?
I've written about several. It's in a small town, as you can imagine, it's tricky, and it's evolved over the years, like it has everywhere. Where I think initially, and in some cases still, people feel shame or embarrassment. in other cases, especially when it's involved, sort of chronic depression, bipolar, mental illness, more than lately, the families have wanted to say something about treatment and what they tried to do. Again, in Haines, especially if it's a public one, for instance, if there was a weapon involved and the police were at the house and everybody heard it, that then becomes a little news story that would be in the same paper, a little sidebar. The police responded to a, attempted suicide. The person ended up doing this, and then I'll write the obituary, and I don't necessarily then have to say that because it's in the same paper and everybody knows who they are. So it just really, really depends. The most, we had a school principal whose husband took his own life. She wanted to talk about it. He had had a lot of health issues and personal issues, and she chose to use that as a teaching moment. But one of our family close friend, also son that we all grew up with, took his own life, and the family didn't want that in his obituary for his children. And yet everybody in town knew that had happened and knew him. And so there was certainly a subtext of that. So I think, well, obviously I had to put it in there, the cause of death, but I think what we did in that case was, instead of put it at the top of a story, typically so-and-so died of such and such on such and such a date would be the lead. Instead, so-and-so is remembered as such and such, this is their life, this is their syndrome. And then at the bottom, he took his own life after years of depression. The family, thanks you for your kindness, but it's evolving.
I just tuned into the fact that you have a newspaper in a really small
Yeah.
town. How's
Yeah,
that?
we're very lucky. See, here's
Is it daily?
No, it's weekly. There it is. So it's, and we're really fortunate. We have a daily newspaper, a weekly newspaper, and we have a public radio station with a news department. And so there's a daily newscast as well for breaking news and some features.
Heather, I have another question, and that is, if you lived in a different community, would your writing be different? We all kind of know Haines is kind of special, but then every community is special. So how would your writing be different in a different community?
I don't know if it would be. I'm not really sure. I guess how would my life be different, because it's so linked to it. It might not be as close to the community. Like my cousin Stuart says that nothing really interesting happens to him, so that's why he writes novels. And I'm in a place where a lot of interesting things happen. But at the same time, I sometimes wonder if I wouldn't think there were interesting things happening anywhere that I was, like you say. I do know that being in Haines essentially created me as a writer, because I think if I was somewhere else, I probably would have had a job that was more demanding and less creative as writing. But I didn't work in the lumberyard. I coached, the high school cross country team, but those are seasonal. I volunteered. It was fun. I didn't teach school all day. And if I had a teaching certificate, or if there had been a way back in the day to do that easily, I probably would have been a school teacher, and then I might not have had time to write or to see the world that way, or certainly to do duly noted or obituaries. And I probably wouldn't have had 5 children either. So a lot of it's circumstantial and where I am, I think.
What can you tell us about the terrible landslides that you had not so long ago?
I can tell you that probably not much that you don't already know, but it was pretty awful. We had this weather event that I think initially we didn't really, it rains a lot here. I don't, in the fall, we have big rainstorms. I don't think anybody thought it was going to contribute to as much damage and destruction as it did, because we just had never seen that before when it rains hard. There's slides all over Haines all the time when it rains. There's one at 19 Mile on the highway that comes down with regularity, and they just plow it away, and 19 Mile is going to close. There's slides that come down Lutak that, there's slide area on the road, and they come across and they plow off the gravel. But the Beach Road area where this particular landslide happened is a place that I don't think anybody in town would have ever guessed was in a slide zone. There's no winter avalanche path. It's kind of a rounded little hill, not even a peak. It's just a little thing that, and a road that goes out right to when you're facing Haines on the water, the fort is here and it's just right over here. It's just everybody will see it forever now, going by the ferry, this huge scar. And it's just sort of this hill just let go and took out 7 houses. And it was completely shocking, I think, and devastating and scary, because then what happened was other hillside neighborhoods, with all the geotech people here and the emergency people, they evacuated anybody that lived on hillsides that were much steeper and were actually in areas that have had slumps or little slides or little mudslides or snow avalanches before. So they evacuated all those areas, and we ended up with hundreds of people out of their homes for a week, some for a couple days, some for 2 weeks, and there's still some families from Beach Road that are displaced. And I think especially coming after the isolation of COVID and, feeling that you're sheltering in place and safe at home, to suddenly have your home not safe was just really frightening, and caused everybody to be just anxious, worried, grieving, afraid. We took it very hard. And then all the things that we usually do to gather together to help and do all that became very difficult because of COVID and the fear that it would be a super spreader, so it was just hard. It was very hard, and it remains hard. There was a presumptive death hearing last week for the 2 people that died in it. And for those of you who don't know the story, one of them was 30. I wrote their obituaries, and guy had lived here for a couple of years, and just a terrific guy. Ran a shuttle between Haines and Whitehorse, wore lederhosen, spoke German, Russian, French, I think. He spoke 3 or 4 languages fluently. Turns out he was a Fulbright scholar who'd spent a lot of time in Belarus. He had a couple different degrees, international degrees from German universities, and also he'd made initial contact in Germany from a kid growing up in California because he played semi-pro baseball there. So just a neat person, and was engaged to a local girl, and and had bought this house, and then he rented a garage apartment to the kindergarten teacher who grew up here, 23 years old. Everybody knew her mom. She graduated from college and came back and got a job teaching in Haines, dream job. And she was home because school was closed because of the storm. And so she was killed too. And so it was just pretty much awful, and remains very hard. And it's very hard to look at the slides still. And it's especially hard. I don't see it from my house because I'm on the other side of town, but people on the hillside with the views out of their windows, it's just tough. You can't look away. It's so big, but it's what's underneath it, I think, is it's just, you see, that lives were lost, and that's hard.
How about the people who were put into different places for a while? Are they safe?
Yeah, I mean, they can't go home. They can't go back to their property. Recently, just last week when it got cold again, a local contractor put in a kind of a pioneer road across the slide, and they did a 24-hour kind of evacuation so that people could go out there and go home and get their vehicles. Remember, they were evacuated without cars and trucks, snow machines, boats, things like that, to get them out, to be able to winterize, try to drain some pipes, get their belongings. They don't know if that area will ever be safe. The geotechs have determined there's a big crack above the whole road, and it came down about halfway, but there's probably know now, maybe 10 or 15 homes on the other side of that slide. And those people can't go back yet, or they're not allowed to. And people have been going around by boat and checking on places, but the word is it's just very unstable. So they're renting in Haines or staying with friends or house sitting and just kind of in limbo, waiting for different agencies, I guess, to figure out what their choices are. So it's hard.
Right.
Well, it's we're past an hour. We have no deadline, but you've had to do a lot of talking here. Are there any more questions about Heather's writing or her books? Well, then I'd like to thank you very much. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for doing this for us.
Thank you. I hope I answered your questions well, and I hope if you haven't read my books, maybe you'll have a little more insight and might read one, and I'll keep you good company. I did the audio book of Find the Good, if you are able to listen, and somebody else did the one too, Bears and Ballots. I wasn't able to travel to do it because of COVID, so they did it in May, and I couldn't go to California, so I haven't actually listened to that. But that's an option too.
Well, at least two of us have listened to the audiobook of Bears and Ballots.
Well, did she do okay?
Yes.
Because I was always worried. I really would prefer to read it myself, but
yes.
That just wasn't meant to be. And it's very nice that somebody wants to read it. So, okay. Well, thank you very much. And I'm easy to find. If you want to send me an email, you can go to my website. It's just my name, Heather Lende. And I usually try to get to emails from there about once a week. So I'll get back to you if you send me a note, but it might not be right away, but I'm pretty good at responding to them all. So thank you very much for asking.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.